don't put too much stress on your first kiss. It'll happen, but like it gets better, more funnier, and like
Yeah. And it only gets magical if you're actually in love with the person, like later on after you've kissed them a lot. But usually the first kiss.
True. I prefer women, but I want a guy to force himself on me. I am open to trans women doing the same, but I don't see too many of them wanting. Oh, some of them do like work off the side because like some of them are actually sex workers. So like there's never a shortage for someone to take a nice 40-year-old hairy man aside and take him. just really take him.
Is one last kiss, but she won't let me have it. I want to get over her, but I can't. I need help. Hey, this is Morgan Rector. Join me and my co-host Rosanna Chilton for the Confession Post podcast. ConfessionPost.com is a website where users post highly personal content anonymously for the reading pleasure of other users. On this podcast, Rosanna and I read confessions from the site and give our analysis. You can listen to the Confession Post podcast on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I am Rachel Telfor.
And I'm Michelle Gower.
We are the hosts of a new true crime podcast.
It is called Children of the Void.
The Void refers to children who are missing.
And children who have died under mysterious and suspicious circumstances.
Sometimes parents know nothing about what has happened to their child.
And sometimes they seem to know more than they let on.
Like Casey Anthony.
And the John Benet Ramsey case.
We are determined to do our part to find missing children.
And the truth when the story of their disappearance doesn't hold up.
Together, we will blast the shadows with light so that no more children disappear into the void.
Children of the Void debuts in September.
Join us so we can all make a difference.
Please subscribe.
Until then, I'm Rachel Telfor.
And I'm Michelle Gower.
You can catch Children of the Void on Apple, Spotify, YouTube,
and everywhere else you get your podcasts.
Hi guys, thanks for listening. Thank you as well to those of you who donate to the Patreon account. I've launched a campaign to raise funds to buy a new iMac. My current computer has been in use for over 8 years, and it is affecting my ability to create new content. As previously stated, my Patreon account can be found at www.patreon, that's patreon.com/Leader1, Leaderone. For those of you who would prefer to make a one-time single donation, there is also the option to send money to my PayPal account. The email address to send it to is Morgan Rector, my last name spelled Rector, 331, Morgan Rector 331 at hotmail.com. Remember, any amount is fine. If $1 one time is all you wish to donate, it would be gratefully accepted. Thank you for all your support, whatever forms it has taken. Enjoy the show. Welcome to Human Monsters. October 17th, 1977. 22-year-old Yolanda was an African-American prostitute working the streets of Los Angeles near the Sunset Strip. At one point, Yolanda was arrested by police. The officers were unduly aggressive toward her. There were 2 cops involved. The one that cuffed her got in the back seat and sat beside her. He told Yolanda that they were going to take her to a precinct to book her. Yolanda sensed something odd was going on. She thought she recognized the driver. She recalled going with her friend Deborah on an errand to an auto upholsterer. She recalled meeting him there. While she was there, she didn't pass up a chance to promote her own services. She told him she could typically be spotted on Sunset around Highland. How many cops moonlight as auto upholsterers? How would they ever find the time? It certainly sounded fishy. That wasn't just because it would be impractical to juggle both careers. It was because an alarming new trend emerged where citizens would pose as police officers. Some of these citizens were criminals. Violent criminals. Sex offenders, even. Back to the so-called cops detaining Yolanda. She said to both, "What's going on? You guys aren't cops, are you?" The cop next to her, significantly younger than the driver, glared at her. She kicked the back of the driver's seat. She said to him, "Hey, I know you. I've seen you before. You ain't a cop. Where are you taking me?" The driver turned around. Now she knew for sure that he was the upholsterer. Both of them admonished her for kicking the back of the driver's seat. The younger one told her to shut up. It didn't end there. The younger one upped the ante. He punched Yolanda in the face. Police brutality against blacks in the United States has a long and well-documented history traceable through decades. She knew the difference between a real cop getting uppity and some creep playing dress-up with a police uniform as his costume. Terror welled up inside of her, pushing its way to the surface, goosebump by goosebump. October 18th, 1977. A gaggle of police officers stood at the entrance to Forest Lawn Memorial Park Cemetery. Many of America's titans of show business had been buried there. Such figures as Walt Disney, Humphrey Bogart, and Michael Jackson have been interred at Forest Lawn. There was nothing glamorous about what the police discovered on this day. The naked and dead body of a young black woman lay on a strip of grass on the outlying border. Judging by the way the grass and shrubs had been impacted, the police concluded she had been thrown from a vehicle that stopped on the freeway. The only garment on her person was a torn rag around her neck, which had been utilized as a ligature. Compression scars on her neck confirmed that she had been strangled to death. They found no identification on her. There was no evidence located nearby that could have been traced to the killer. The police were able to identify her later on. Her fingerprints were taken and they were found within the database. She had been arrested for soliciting, so they were now able to attach a name to the face. The coroner found traces of semen from 2 different men. The DNA profiles were drawn up, but could not be traced to anyone. One of them was a so-called non-secretor, that is, a person whose blood type cannot be ascertained from the examination of their seminal fluid. The case went cold after all this information was documented. There wasn't much to go on when it came to identifying the perpetrators. The only thing was that she had been a prostitute, and such an event was considered to be an occupational hazard for women in her line of work. The case was closed. The common sentiment among law enforcement at the time regarding the murder of prostitutes was that the men who committed the offense were not a threat to members of conventional society, and therefore the cases were not worth investigating. The law did not protect prostitutes. It only arrested them. Johns would occasionally be arrested, but they would only receive a slap on the wrist. Pimps were rarely caught and seldom prosecuted. In the meantime, call girls were susceptible to violence and murder. October 31st. Electrician Chuck Kane discovered the body of a young woman near the curb in front of his house at dawn. She was scrawny, petite, and naked. He got out of his car to see if the girl was all right. When he took a closer look, he became nauseous. There were deep ligature scars on her neck, and her skin was blue. He went to his backyard and returned with a tarpaulin to cover the body. He didn't want the neighborhood's children to see the corpse. It was not an advisable move, according to police. He may have contaminated the crime scene. Along with the ligature marks around her neck were ring-shaped scars around her wrists and ankles, indicative of the use of handcuffs and/or shackles. Her legs were spread apart, and her knees had been raised. It looked as though the body was positioned for sexual intercourse. An artist's composite sketch of the girl was published in a newspaper, but nobody came forward with knowledge of her identity. The coroner found that before she was strangled, she had been raped anally and vaginally. Traces of adhesive tape were found on her face, indicating the use of a gag. Detective Frank Salerno walked around Hollywood and showed several of the locals the composite sketch. One man, Marcus Youngblood Camden, recognized the girl. He said her name was Judy Miller. Her parents were located in a rundown hotel nearby. Judy came from an abusive, negligent, and dysfunctional family. Her mother, father, and 2 younger brothers were living in a single room. It was filthy, cluttered, and befouled by the stench of sour milk, mold, and feces due to the presence of spoiled food and soiled diapers. Judy's death didn't affect her parents at all. When her father received the news, he simply nodded, as if to be polite enough to convey to the detective that he was listening. He was helpful enough to confirm that Judy was the girl in the composite sketch. A professional dancer known as Lisa was approached by 2 uniformed police officers after she stopped her car at her apartment building. One of the cops shone his flashlight through the driver's side window. He motioned with his index finger for her to wind her window down. He said, "Police officers, ma'am, license, please." She handed the license to him. She couldn't get a good look at him because he was shining the flashlight beam directly in her eyes, and she had to look away. Lisa insisted on knowing why they were carding her. She had not committed any kind of crime. The younger cop held the license and handed it to the older one. After looking at her license, the officers looked at each other as if giving a signal. The younger one said, "Step out of the car, please." Lisa balked. They still had not explained what it was all about, and she conveyed this to them. The younger one said, "We ask the questions, ma'am, but since you asked so politely, there's been some trouble over near Vine and Highland, a robbery. Your car was seen leaving the scene." Lisa explained that she waited tables in that area and that she had no involvement with the robbery. She was anxious to get home because she had a plane to catch. The young man said he would contact the manager of the restaurant and settle the matter. In the meantime, he said, she would have to accompany them to the police station. Given that they were police, Lisa felt there was no choice but to comply. When she stepped out of the car, the young one told her to drop her bag on the ground. He pushed her against the side of her car. He frisked her while the older cop riffled through her bag. She told them she would be happy to go with them to the police station, though it wouldn't amount to anything since she had not run afoul of the law and therefore had nothing to confess. The younger one said, "Be quiet. Stop making a scene. You'll wake up the neighborhood, and you're only making things worse for yourself." The cops put her in the back of their cruiser, and they drove off into the night. Lisa's father was notified by the manager of the restaurant where she worked that she didn't show up for her shift. He reported her missing to the police. They notified him that the dead body of a girl was found who matched her description. When he saw images from the closed-circuit camera in the morgue, he confirmed that it was her. Lisa's body was found by a jogger next to the golf course of the Chevy Chase Country Club in Glendale. She was naked. The Glendale Police Department opined that the body was dropped from Chevy Chase Drive and rolled downhill to the golf course's fence. She had been strangled. There were ligature marks on her neck. Detective Salerno paid a visit to the Glendale PD, and they compared notes. It occurred to Salerno that Lisa and Judy Miller might have been killed by the same offender. Lisa was raped, though unlike Judy Miller, she was only penetrated vaginally. The police realized that the perpetrators were likely posing as police officers, which presented a whole host of other problems since it had obviously been an effective ruse. The police did not announce this publicly, nor did they admit that a serial offender was on the loose. They felt it would provoke hysteria throughout the community. The police may have been committed to secrecy, but the media sure weren't. On November 10th, the headline on the front page of the Los Angeles Times went, "Two Glendale slangs may be linked." All they knew was that both girls were strangled. They knew nothing about the fact that two offenders were involved in the slayings. Salerno interviewed Youngblood again to learn more about what happened between him and Judy Miller the night of her disappearance. He admitted he had sex with her. If he left semen in her body, he stood in line to become a suspect. The best he could do for Salerno was to describe the car driven by her John and the John's physical features. November 23rd. A fourth victim was found. She was 28-year-old actress Jane King. She was partially concealed beneath fallen leaves. The night she disappeared, she was on her way home from an acting class. As she waited, a young man sat down next to her in the shelter. He asked her when the next bus was due to arrive. Though usually guarded with strangers, Jane didn't detect anything shady about the man. He came across as harmless. He told her he had just moved to Los Angeles from Rochester, New York. He was told he needed to drive to live in Los Angeles, but he took it with a grain of salt, much to his regret. They made some small talk about the shortcomings of the city's public transportation system. She usually kept to herself, so she let him take the lead. He eventually made her feel more at ease, and she opened up to him a little. She told him she was an aspiring actress, and he told her he wished to find work in policing or security. He said he was accepted into the sheriff's reserves. He showed her his badge. An older man pulled up. The man she had been talking to identified himself as Tony. When his friend offered them a ride, she did what people who knew her well would not have expected. She accepted. Jane told the man she knew as Tony that she was just going down to the end of Franklin. She told him she didn't expect him to go too far out of his way. He reassured her that this was not an inconvenience. He said, "No problem. Only thing is, I've been out on the road all day, on my way to my last appointment now. Gotta make a quick detour to pick something up at my house. That okay?" Having said that, he diverted on an entirely unexpected direction. They drove away from Hollywood and toward Glendale. After she failed to return from her class, her boyfriend and roommate reported her as missing. November 20th. A group of boys were searching a junk pile for salvageable goods. One boy sought what appeared to be 2 store mannequins. When he touched one of the mannequin's ankles, he drew back, recoiling, shocked. The ankle had a squishy consistency. Ants were feasting on it. The 9-year-old knew he had just found dead bodies. He reported them to his 17-year-old brother, who in turn reported the finding to the police. LAPD homicide were dispatched to the scene. The bodies were both female. They had been dead for a long time because early stages of decomposition were underway. There was a hole in one of their cheeks. Mold was growing in that same cheek. The girls were estimated to be between 11 and 13 years old. The boy who found them said he did not know the girls, but he recalled that the students at his school were approached by the school's administration to find out if any of them were aware of the girls' whereabouts. They were identified as 12-year-old Dolores Cepeda and 14-year-old Sonia Johnson. They had been missing from school for a week. When the coroner turned one of the bodies over during the autopsy, blood oozed out of her rectum. She had not only been sodomized, but she was raped with aggression. The offender's identity was unknown at this juncture, but it was obvious when he raped the girl that he wanted it to hurt. There was bruising on her wrists and ankles. In the crook of her arm were 2 tiny red marks that resided within large pools of green. They were injection scars. The girls were injected with some kind of poison. The police realized that the perpetrators were sadists. On the same day that the bodies of Dolores Cepeda and Sonia Johnson were found, the body of 20-year-old art student Christina Weckler was found at a location known as Ramon's Way. She was reported missing after one of her classmates noted her absence in class, which was apparently out of character for Christina, who was highly conscientious about her studies. Her friend persuaded Christina's landlord to let her into her apartment. Christina was not there. Christina's car was parked outside of the building. Christina's body was ravaged. Several injection marks were made, suggesting that she was tortured over a long period of time. One promising lead in cracking the case of the murders of Dolores Cepeda and Sonia Johnson came from a boy who rode a bus with them the day in question. He recalled seeing a sedan slowing down toward them. He saw the girls talk to a man who remained in the vehicle. He was sure there was someone riding shotgun. He was unable to remember the car in detail. He agreed to be hypnotized so he could remember it more clearly. While he was hypnotized, the boy recalled the sedan was dark on the bottom and lightly colored on the top, similar to a police car. These findings were consistent with details that were described by other witnesses. The girls had been shoplifting makeup and were timid with the police officers, feeling that they had been busted, so they complied with their directives. Multiple law enforcement agencies in the greater Los Angeles area were now combining their resources, since it was clear that a serial offender was responsible for these murders. A task force was created and led by the LAPD. The police kept the sexual element of the crimes from the press. The Los Angeles Times referred to the culprit as the Hillside Strangler, since the bodies were dumped on slopes by roadsides and freeways around the city. It was not pluralized because there was not yet any solid evidence that the murders were committed by more than one offender. November 28th. Lauren Wagner was returning home from a date with her boyfriend. She was approached by two men in a car as she walked toward her house. She knew about the Hillside Strangler, but she felt that such criminals operated outside of her world. A neighbor's dog barked relentlessly as this went on. The owner came out of her house to see what the commotion was about. She watched, frozen in terror, as Lauren was forced into the car by the men. The car was a sedan, dark color on the bottom, light color on top. One man was tall with black hair and a fair complexion, except for acne around his neck. The other man was older, shorter, and had curly hair. Lauren didn't make it easy for them. She fought back with everything she had. She screamed at them, saying, "You won't get away with this." On that cue, the door was shut and the car sped away. Lauren's neighbor went back in the house. She knew what she had just seen. It was all over the newspapers. As she was coming to her senses, the telephone rang. A male voice with an accent endemic to the east coast of the United States said, "You the lady with the dog? You better keep your trap shut about what you've seen. You say anything to anyone, you're as good as dead." The woman was so petrified, she decided to take the man's advice. The next day, Lauren's parents were suspicious when they noticed that Lauren still hadn't come home. Her car was parked outside. Her father, Joe, went out to have a look at it. The driver's side door was left open. The pilot light was still on. Joe walked up and down his street, asking neighbors if they had seen Lauren since the evening of the previous day. When he spoke to the woman who witnessed Lauren's abduction, Joe demanded to know why she didn't call on him to report the incident. She claimed she didn't know for sure if it was Lauren. She said she assumed it was some other girl arguing with her boyfriend. Joe wasn't convinced of this. He sensed that she knew more than she was disclosing to him. Joe returned home and reported Lauren's disappearance to the police. Though he was told he could only report her disappearance after a 24-hour absence, he told the officer the story his neighbor, the witness, had told him. Police went to his home to investigate the matter. Like any Los Angeles area parent of a missing young woman in those days, Joe feared that Lauren was preyed upon by the Hillside Strangler. Sadly, his worst fear was realized. That morning, Lauren's dead body was found in the hills between Glendale and Mount Washington. She was naked. She had been strangled. She was left so close to a road that her legs stretched out over asphalt. There was the customary bruising around her wrists, ankles, and neck. The investigating officers found injuries that had not been observed on the Hillside Strangler victims before. There were puncture marks on her arms. There were some unusual lesions on her hands. One cop speculated that they appeared to be burn marks. A sticky substance was found on her hands. Speculation had it that it was either glue or the residue from adhesive tape. A sticky substance was found on her breasts, which was assumed to be either semen or saliva. For some murderers, killing becomes addictive. Just like any other addiction, the junkie can only achieve satisfaction by upping the ante and increasing the dosage. The evil and depravity visited upon the Hillside Strangler victims would continue to escalate. The neighbor of Joe Wagner's, who witnessed the abduction, was interviewed by police. She told them about the threatening phone call. She was assured that she would be protected. She described the suspects and promised to look at photos or go to a lineup. Something was suspicious, though. How could this woman, who was visually impaired, have seen that one of the men had acne on his neck from across the street at night? Also, how did the men get her phone number? Female citizens of Los Angeles were advised that if they were stopped by men in a car who appeared to be police officers, they should ask to see their credentials. Retailers reported a sharp surge of sales of guns, ammunition, baseball bats, and lead pipes. More women were enrolling in martial arts classes than ever before. Guard dogs were purchased as a precautionary measure as the owners went about their business in the city. Paranoia and hypervigilance swept over the city like an ominous storm cloud. To make matters worse, most women felt little confidence in the LAPD's ability to bring the offenders to justice. Most prostitutes created a buddy system so that they wouldn't be killed while they walked the block. Many prostitutes would report encounters with men who appeared to be police officers but were likely imposters. The women would say such things as, "These guys pulled me over and lectured me for something I never done. I thought they were cops, but then I realized it wasn't a real cop car. He showed me his badge, but now that I think about it, I don't think it was the real thing. They were acting all tough and mighty, like cops, but I don't think they were cops." The women were harassed about committing petty crimes, or offenses that were not prohibited by law. They also recalled that the vehicles and badges didn't look legitimate. It didn't help that there was a history of LAPD officers indulging in what they called pussy stops. Sometimes cops would extort sexual favors from prostitutes while promising they would not be arrested. In some cases, beatings and rapes have occurred under these circumstances. When this practice was reported at this time, it embarrassed the LAPD to no end. The task force personnel grew to 100 officers. Still, there were no solid leads or evidence available to busting the perp. December 13th. 17-year-old Kimberly Diane Martin was a call girl. She worked for a nude modeling agency called Climax. The women on the agency's Rolodex did more than pose for photos and paintings. On the night in question, the secretary who worked for Climax received a call by a man who identified himself as one Mike Ryan. It was a suspicious call, since it sounded like it was coming from a payphone. It turned out he was actually calling from a branch of the Hollywood Public Library. As a safety measure, the secretary called the man at that same number. When she did, and asked if the number was assigned to a private residence, a woman answered and said, "Sorry, ma'am, we can't give out that information." The secretary decided to dispatch Kimberly to the client's apartment anyway. When Kimberly knocked on the man's door, a young man answered. He had dark hair and a mustache. When she entered, she knew there was something dodgy about the environment she just entered. The apartment hadn't been lived in since it was vacated by its previous occupants. Everything was new and clean. No furniture. It was bare. Later, on the 4th floor of the building, a resident named Sari heard screams, a scuffle, and other signs of violence. She heard people running up and down the hallways. A man who lived in the building said after the fact that he heard a woman scream very distinctly, "Someone's trying to kill me." He said it was the most disturbing scream he had ever heard. Kimberly was being raped and tortured. When Kimberly did not return to Climax at the designated time, her disappearance was reported to the sheriff's department by the secretary. She was informed that a missing person report could only be submitted after 24 hours. He also said that because she was a prostitute, the police would not see the case as a priority. December 14th. 2 paper boys found Kimberly's body as they delivered along their morning route along Alvarado Street in the Echo Park district. Kimberly was naked. Her legs were spread wide. Staff of the library, where the man who identified as Mike Ryan noted to police that they observed a man behaving suspiciously in the building. They said a tall, dark, mustachioed man was lingering at the payphone for a much longer period of time than was customary for most people. He had not only made a long call, but received a call at the same phone. A user of the library recalled seeing the man there that day. A woman named Cheryl Burke was browsing through the books when a man she described as bushy-haired glared at her through a space between the shelves. He adopted a menacing look. He made her so uncomfortable she had to move elsewhere. Having done that, she fell within his crosshairs again when he appeared around a corner and stared at her. Cheryl left the library shortly thereafter and drove away. On another occasion, she saw the man at the library again. Only this time, he was accompanied by a younger and taller man with a mustache. As she was pulling out of the parking lot, she saw them talking for a short time. The younger one approached her car and glared at her. She sped away. Detectives discovered that the apartment Kimberly was summoned to by Mike Ryan was not only uninhabited, but it had not even yet been leased. There were no signs of a scuffle, though prints were taken. Tenants of the building reported that they had seen a man come and go in the building from apartment 114 despite not being a resident. In fact, many tenants told the Times Daily newspaper that a man had been using the vacant unit intermittently for months. He was described as having long hair and a mustache. The LAPD's failure to investigate cases of disappearing prostitutes because they were prostitutes became widely publicized, and it drew a great deal of criticism from activists, politicians, and the public. It was a public relations disaster for the LAPD, one of many in their troubled history. It didn't help when the LAPD spokesman said to the press, "Finding out what happened isn't the top priority. We've got 11 murders we're trying to solve." In the coming weeks, the criticism and frustration mounted, both from the media and the public. Complicating matters, the Hillside Strangler was inactive during the rest of December 1977 and throughout January of 1978. To make matters even worse, women were being strangled to death by other offenders. A literal bloodbath was underway in California during the 1970s and 80s, so trying to find one strangler would not be easy while so many others were active. February 16th, 1978. The lull in the Hillside Stranglers killing spree was over. Middle school teacher Jan Sims was driving along Riverside Drive when she observed a man pulling a girl into his car. She had been waiting at a bus stop and he was pulling her away from it. As he did this, a car, an Excalibur, pulled up. The driver sat in his car, idling. Sims got out and confronted the man. She said, "You leave her alone. Get away from her this instant. I'll call the police." The man was caught off guard. He released the girl's arms. She ran to Jan Sims, relieved to find protection and safety in her embrace. The man was infuriated. As Sims put the girl in her car, the man said to her, "God will get you for this." Mrs. Sims dispatched the girl home in a bus. It occurred to Sims that she may have just thwarted an attack by the Hillside Strangler. She drove directly to a North Hollywood police station. She explained what happened, but they rebuffed any possibility that this could be connected to the Hillside Strangler killings. The officer she spoke with didn't believe her. He assumed it was a hoax presented by what is known in first responder parlance as an EDP, or emotionally disturbed person. Nevertheless, they perfunctorily took a report and filed it away, where it would collect dust while the Hillside Strangler collected victims. She called the following week to report that she saw the same car, the Excalibur model, driving along Colorado Street in Glendale. The officer she reported this to was annoyed. He considered Mrs. Sims to be a pest. She recalled seeing one of the abductors in a parking lot weeks before she intervened in the kidnapping. She didn't bother reporting this information to the police because she knew she would be disbelieved and rebuffed. February 17th. A Forest Service worker in a helicopter happened upon a sedan that had been crashed into a ravine. When rescue workers attended to the scene, they discovered the naked body of Cindy Lee Hudspeth. With this, the Hillside Stranglers' killing spree came to an end. The aftermath, however, was far from over. Late February 1978. 2 men who were roommates in Glendale contacted their local police department with a tip. They said their former roommate, Kenneth Bianchi, owned a California Highway Patrol badge. This struck them as suspicious since they knew he was not an officer of the law. Their general description of him was that he was, quote, generally pretty strange, unquote. They evicted him for failing to catch up on rental arrears. They didn't know where he currently resided. Glendale police looked into motor registry information and connected Bianchi's name to an apartment at Verdugo Road. It was there where they interviewed him. They asked him if he had or had ever had a police badge. He handled it well, saying he had not. He told them he had wanted to be a police officer, but opted for a career in real estate. Bianchi struck the police as too clean-cut and obsequious to be a serial killer and rapist. Assuming Bianchi was telling the truth, the officers left it at that. At LAPD headquarters, a tip came in from one Ms. Wanda Kellison. She informed detectives that her daughter Cheryl had dated a young man named Kenneth Bianchi. She described him as strange. She didn't like him at all. She had a bad feeling about him, though it had its basis in the nebulous realm of intuition. She was frustrated that he was constantly borrowing money from Cheryl. Cheryl didn't see any need for concern. It wasn't enough to incriminate him, but 2 LAPD officers decided to conduct some checks on Bianchi's background, almost as a courtesy to Ms. Kellison. Bianchi's former landlord had nothing but good things to say about him, and was quite grandiose in his praise of the man. When the detectives interviewed Bianchi, he was not only cooperative, but offered to help in any other way he could. The police were still embarrassed by their inability to solve the Hillside Strangler case. They wouldn't even concede that all 13 murders were committed by a single perpetrator. 1979. Kenneth Bianchi relocated to the Pacific Northwest, in the state of Washington. He settled in the town of Bellingham. It was a quiet place, and despite the fact that 4 serial killers had struck in the area throughout the years, it was relatively low in crime. That changed in a dramatic way, as reported on the morning of January 12, 1979. The Bellingham Police Department were contacted by the Security Office of Western Washington University. 2 students, 27-year-old Diane Wilder and 22-year-old Karen Mandick, both natives of Bellevue, Washington, were reported missing. Violence was such a minor problem in Bellingham that local police assumed the girls may have taken off for a brief vacation without telling their nearest and dearest. This assumption proved to be incorrect when it came to Karen Mandic. She was last seen at 7 p.m. on January 11th. She left the Fred Meyer department store where she was working as a cashier. She was due to return to the store at 9 p.m. to tie up some loose ends. She was a very reliable employee, and her boss was concerned when she failed to return without even notifying him she would be so much as late. He placed a call to one of her friends, who said they hadn't seen her since she left the store. Karen had been offered a house-sitting job by a man who worked for Whatcom Security Agency, though she received the offer off the books. This was in violation of the company's policy. The man swore her to secrecy. She was asked to mind a house while the occupant was away, so that the man who hired her could repair the burglar alarm. If all had gone according to plan, she would have returned to the Fred Meyer store after completing this task. She brought her friend Diane Wilder along with her to keep her company. She failed to mention to Diane that the man who hired her had asked her out several times, and she finally agreed to see him. When police went to the address where Karen and Diane had been house-sitting, they found that the house was deserted. They decided to contact Whatcom Security Agency. After consulting their records, they discovered that one Kenneth Bianchi had been assigned to service the order for that house. Though the company was satisfied with Bianchi's work and conduct thus far, they decided to run a background check on him anyway. The co-owner of WSA, Randy Moa, spoke with a woman named Susan Bird, who knew Bianchi. She told him she was surprised that he would be employed in a security business. Moa said to her, "Why is that?" She said, "Well, he just didn't strike me as that type. I thought he was real shady, actually. He actually said that I had a great figure and should consider working as a prostitute. He offered to be my pimp." She was also concerned about this proposal because she knew he had applied for a position with the Bellingham Police Department. The investigating officer was skeptical about this, but when Susan gave him the name of another woman who knew Bianchi, he investigated her too. The woman's name was Angie Kinneberg. She said he was very nice to her at first. He visited her and her friend during the Christmas season and helped take down their tree. Eventually, she began to sense that there was something dodgy about him. Indeed, his other professional activities were tawdry by contrast. Angie discovered he had been photographing lesbian models for clients in Los Angeles. Angie concluded by saying, "He's a kinky bastard. He's got a wife, though, Kelly. They have a little boy. That guy is really weird, you know." Randy Moa reported this information to Kenneth Bianchi over the phone. Bianchi laughed it off. He denied that he arranged house-sitting jobs. He also told him he never met Karen Mandic or Diane Wilder. He said he had an alibi for the night of their disappearance. He attended a first aid meeting for the Sheriff's Reserve. He may have been rejected from the Los Angeles equivalent, but this organization accepted Bianchi. His instructor confirmed this for Moa, but though he was confirmed to be a member of the reserve, the instructor informed Moa that Bianchi did not attend the meeting in question. Moa called the Bellingham Police Department to inform them that Bianchi lied regarding his whereabouts during the night of the disappearance of Karen Mandic and Diane Wilder. The security office at Western Washington University provided a key to police so they could search Karen's apartment. There was a pad of paper next to the telephone. On the top sheet was written, "Karen, please call Ken B." When the police encountered Kenneth Bianchi, he was working. He wasn't rattled by the presence of the police or their questions regarding his possible role in the disappearance of Mandic and Wilder. He was polite and cooperative throughout. As he always did at the end of police interviews, He offered to assist them in any way he could. He was presented with the note the police found in Karen Mandek's apartment that bore his name. Suddenly his demeanor changed. He responded with indignation. He insisted that it was a case of identity theft. He ranted about it, saying, "I would like to know who's been using my name. I'm well known in Bellingham. I was in the newspaper when I left Fred Meyer to come over to WSA in charge of security operations." He was never an operations manager at WSA. He was just a common security guard. The holes in his story were gaping. Be that as it may, the police still did not know for sure if the girls were murdered. Bodies had not been found. One officer asked the highway patrol to check remote locations to see if bodies had been dumped. He also told them to be on the lookout for abandoned cars. The girls' disappearances and descriptions of their vehicles were distributed to the media. Soon after, a woman called the police and reported that she had seen an abandoned car in a wooded area close to her home. A cul-de-sac on Willow Street was the spot where Karen Mandek's Mercury Bobcat was parked. The doors were locked. Nobody was in the front seats. On the back seats were the corpses of Karen Mandek and Diane Wilder. One lay atop the other. Unlike the Hillside Strangler victims in Los Angeles, they were fully clothed. The autopsy concluded that they had been raped and strangled with a ligature. A warrant was issued to place Kenneth Bianchi under arrest. He was armed and dangerous. He could not be left to stalk the streets as long as women walked free. The police enlisted Randy Moa to assist them in their efforts to detain Bianchi. Moa wanted to fire him, but agreed to cooperate with the investigation so he could be arrested. He contacted him over the radio to inspect the Dockland area. This was decided upon as an ideal spot for him to be cornered with no escape route. The detectives waited at the Docklands. They were hidden and ready to ambush Bianchi. When he came along, they took him into custody without incident. The Bellingham Police Department accomplished in one day what the LAPD could not in a year, and with far less personnel. When his identification was examined, it was confirmed that he moved to Bellingham from Los Angeles. He was not confirmed to be the Hillside Strangler at this time. Bellingham police searched Bianchi's house. He had a common-law wife named Kelly Boyd and a son named Ryan. Kelly was incredulous when the officers informed her about the offenses for which Kenneth was charged. Police found numerous consumer goods that were stolen from the Fred Meyer department store. There was also a gross of medical supplies, which were stolen from the Verdugo Hills Hospital in Los Angeles. He stole them while he was working there. There was a box of brand new jackets and another filled with touch-tone telephones. It wasn't yet proven if these items played a role in his crimes. A more ominous finding was the presence of a .357 caliber highway patrolman's revolver. So far, the only proof of malfeasance the police had found was that Kenneth Bianchi was a thief and a con artist. In the bedroom, the investigators found a pair of uniform pants. The crotch had been ripped out. Kelly recalled that Kenneth was wearing the pants the night of the murders. She found them comical. She was still unaware that some of the jewelry Kenneth gave her was pilfered from the bodies of his victims. She said she gave up on asking Kenneth what he did with his evenings. She said that on the night in question, he came home at 10:30 and that he was sweating profusely. She had never seen him in that state. A couple of residents of Willow Street told police they saw a yellow WSA truck first parked and then departing from the street. Bianchi's car was searched. A leather briefcase was found on the front passenger side seat. Inside was a cache of documents that profiled a psychiatric counseling service in Los Angeles, with the attending physician being one Dr. Ken Bianchi. Chief Mangan of the Bellingham Police Department contacted the LAPD. He informed them that he arrested a man suspected of committing murder and that his name was Kenneth Bianchi. They told him that they arrested a man by the name of Kenneth Alicio Bianchi on suspicion of double homicide and rape. He was also suspected of being the Hillside Strangler. Mangan was sent composite drawings of the Hillside Stranglers suspects. One of them matched Bianchi precisely. Bianchi's fingerprints were sent to the LAPD. They were a match. There was now evidence linking Kenneth Bianchi both to the Hillside Strangler murders and the murders in Bellingham. During interrogation, Bianchi denied any culpability in the offenses for which he was charged. He broke down crying during the interview. He was playing the role of victim. Kelly Boyd told the police that Kenneth's only friend in Los Angeles was his cousin, Angelo Buono. Buono's house was placed under surveillance. He was also tailed. More information about Bianchi and Buono's personal and professional lives came to light. For a time, they ran an escort agency in Los Angeles called Foxy Ladies. One girl told police that she and another girl were held hostage by Bianchi and Buono as sex slaves. They would beat and rape the girls in between dispatching them to service clients. A girl named Rebecca Spears lived in fear of Bianchi and Buono. She felt that they intended to murder her. She flew to Phoenix and started a new life there. An attorney named David Wood arranged for her move. When Buono found out about this, he was enraged. The way he saw it, Wood stole his quote-unquote property. He began to harass Wood. Wood was only able to put a stop to it when he sent a thug of his own to Angelo's place of business. Angelo was sufficiently intimidated, and he no longer harassed Wood or Spears. Buono was interrogated about the business he and Bianchi were operating. Though he answered all the questions police posed to him, he also perjured himself throughout. He even claimed that he and Kenneth were estranged and were therefore unaware of what the other were doing for a living. Despite his facade as a respectable and legitimate entrepreneur, Buono was found to have a lengthy criminal record. Some of his personal associates attested to his voracious appetite for sex, which often incorporated deviancy and violence. These same people implicated that Angelo and Kenneth were not only in cahoots, but that they were partners in an enterprise of rape and sexual slavery. What is known about Angelo's early life was that he was adopted. This transaction led to a great deal of buyer's remorse on his mother's part. He performed poorly at school and frequently cut class. His adoptive mother, Jenny, was employed full-time and was unable to correct his behavior. By the time he was 14, he was boasting to his peers about raping and sodomizing young girls. Speculation had it that it was that to which he dedicated his time while skipping school. As an adult, he appeared normal through the prism of first impressions. He was a conscientious and meticulous housekeeper. He was an animal lover with several pets on the premises. Unfortunately, this normalcy did not bleed into his relations with and attitudes regarding women. While still a minor, he became strongly misogynistic. He regularly insulted his adoptive mother, using words like cunt and whore. He would address all the women he dated using these terms. He would routinely refer to women monolithically as cunts. He was unapologetic in doing so. He hated women, but he was also a sex addict. Hence, his intimate relationships with women were tempestuous and complicated. Angelo had been married 3 times. He was the father of 8 children. He had been convicted multiple times for failure to pay child support. Among his other charges were theft, assault, and rape. He served time in both juvenile detention facilities and adult penitentiaries. Though women were at first attracted to his macho demeanor, they weren't nearly as taken with him when they encountered his hatred of their gender. Their sexual appetites were seldom commensurate. His sexual proclivities were oriented toward the sadistic and degrading. The more humiliating and painful the act was for the woman, the more he enjoyed it. These women knew the malice was authentic. He would often up the ante while abusing them, frequently to the point where they feared he would kill them. Still, for years, his rugged masculinity attracted an endless coterie of admirers. They were not yet aware of how their arousal would deteriorate into suffering by the end of the night. He was also a successful man, earning a good living as an automobile upholsterer, whose work was so highly rated that some of his clients were high-profile entertainers, like Frank Sinatra. He had 2 nicknames, the Italian Stallion and the Buzzard, which was a reference to his large and crooked nose. He was a sleazeball typical of the era, sleeping in a waterbed and wearing only red silk underwear. He was short, skinny, with curly hair dyed black. He had crooked teeth to match the crooked nose. He had skin whose consistency was described as being similar to greased leather. One detective remarked to another that he had never seen a man so closely resemble a lump of shit. One of the detectives was not exactly charmed when his girlfriend went to Buono's shop to have a look at him. Though she was told that he was a ladies' man, she was also told that he was slimy and ugly. She said that while he was not conventionally attractive, there was something magnetic about him. She even said to her boyfriend, "If I didn't know who he was, I might have dropped my clothes right there." Her boyfriend said, "God damn it, don't you ever go anywhere near that guy again." When they questioned Buono at his shop, they asked him if he ever drank at the Robin Hood Inn, which was located close to his business. They said that a waitress who worked there observed Buono talking to Cindy Hudspeth when she was waiting tables part-time. He not only denied knowing her, but he said he never went to the Robin Hood Inn and didn't know where it was. He claimed to be straight edge, completely eschewing the consumption of alcohol. They asked him about 2 other victims, Becky Spears and Sabra Hanan. He took a look at photos of the girls. He said he never knew Becky Spears. He said he was introduced to Sabra through Kenneth. He said Kenneth and Sabra were intimately involved, though he insisted he knew nothing about their relationship. He was asked about Foxy Ladies. He said he knew the owner and the company's driver, but he couldn't recognize the driver from a photograph. He said he met the women, quote, through another guy, end quote. One of the interrogators, Detective Bob Grogan, ran out of patience. Grogan: "Hey, Angelo, let's stop wasting time. We've already talked to Becky. We've already talked to Sabra. We already talked to David Wood, the lawyer from Bel Air you tried to screw over. You and Ken were running broads." Angelo rolled his eyes at this. He was confident. They couldn't rattle him. "Angelo, I ain't never been running no broads. Look, man, I'm just a regular guy, like you. I got a job to do. You got a job to do. So let's get it over with and let each other do their job. Those girls, that Becky and Sabra, they were working for Kenny, I think. I had nothing to do with it. Buono launched a contrived story about how Becky and Sabra were self-employed as prostitutes and were operating out of his house. Kenneth was the pimp. Angelo never got involved. He had sex with the girls, and it was always consensual. They wanted it. He didn't know how old they were. Grogan wasn't buying any of it. He flew into a rage and shouted straight into Angelo's face. "Grogan, me and my partner here, we work homicide, right? So we don't care about pimping or prostitution unless it relates to the question we're asking. We already got plenty on you, scumbag. Not just about the beating and the rapes. We got a witness saw you pick up Judy Miller on Sunset. We got another one seen you abducting Lauren Wagner with Kenny. See where this is going?" To prove to Buono that he wasn't fucking around, Grogan removed the wire and recorder that was hidden in his jacket and placed them on the desk. Angelo didn't look quite so confident all of a sudden. His eyes were shifting around the room. Grogan, like an avian predator, was about to swoop down for the kill. However, Angelo got himself together. With his composure reinstated, he said, "I didn't do no murders. I ain't abducted nobody. You're hassling the wrong guy." He was so confident about his ability to emerge from the interview victorious, he waived his right to be represented by an attorney. During Phase 2 of the interrogation, the detectives knew that Bianchi and Buono were neither estranged nor casually acquainted. In fact, they lived together when Kenneth first moved to Los Angeles. He recalled meeting Kelly Boyd, to whom he referred as, quote, "that fat bitch," unquote. He denied owning police paraphernalia. He admitted that Kenneth owned some kind of law enforcement badge. He said, "He had something like that, but I'm not sure. You could buy stuff like that down at the swap meet. They got everything down there. Man, you can get fake badges all over town. Lots of guys got those things." Buono also confirmed that Bianchi was practicing psychology with bogus credentials. Buono was asked about the locations where victims of the Hillside Strangler were found. He denied ever visiting those places with Kenneth. He was shown photos of the victims. He said he was not familiar with any of them. At one point, Grogan went for the jugular and asked Angelo if he was involved in the murders. He said that all he knew about the murders had its basis in the media's coverage. He was asked if he had any theories about who the identity of the Hillside Strangler was. He said, "I don't read, so I didn't see nothing in the papers. I might have seen the odd thing on television. A friend of mine brought the subject up once, and I said, maybe they should be looking for two girls who done it, or maybe a guy and a girl. Because, you know, a girl would jump quicker into a car when there was a woman in the car than if there were two dudes." Conclusively, they asked him if he had had any contact with Kenneth since he moved to Bellingham. He said he hadn't. The detectives asked him if the men had a falling out. Angelo said that one thing that afflicted their relationship was Kenneth's propensity to borrow money and fail to reimburse him. He said, "Look, he was a real nice guy. He'd give you the shirt off his back. But sometimes he wants something and you don't give it to him, he gets mad. And I figure, you know, why get in a hassle for a few dollars? I'd rather forget about it. Then don't loan him the money next time, see?" The detectives focused on Bianchi's temper for a moment. They asked Angelo if he thought Kenneth might have been involved in the murders. Angelo said, "Could be. You never know. He was a little crazy. He could have lost his mind." The detectives interviewed Angelo's ex-wife, Candy. She told them Angelo raped and beat her habitually. He would tie her to the bed by her wrists and ankles before raping her anally and vaginally. They wanted to interview his children, but she wouldn't allow it. She did tell them that her children were terrified of Angelo. Her son Peter believed that Angelo would murder him one day. Candy believed that Angelo was more than capable of killing anybody who crossed him. She also mentioned that the hillside trash heap where the bodies of Dolores Cepeda and Sonia Johnson were found was very familiar to Angelo. He had actually taken his family there for picnics. His ex-girlfriend Melinda Hooper lived on Alta Terrace Drive, where Judy Miller's body was dumped. In fact, she lived almost next door to the location. Angelo's former roommate, Artie Ford, had some interesting data of his own to contribute. Though he generally held aloof to Buono, he did notice some things about him that he dubbed, quote, peculiarities, unquote. Buono also made some comments that he found disturbing. He recalled that Angelo bragged about raping one of his stepdaughters, her name being Annette. She was 14 years old at the time, and he told Artie that she, quote, needed to be broken in, unquote. Once he was finished raping Annette, he passed her over to his sons so they could violate her. His son Peter once reported that Angelo sodomized him. The house Artie and Angelo lived in was located close to a high school. One day Artie stumbled upon the visage of Angelo masturbating while admiring some of the girls through binoculars. There was an incident where Angelo was angry at Candy after they had a fight. He snuck into her house and left the gas on in the kitchen. He hoped that she would light a cigarette in the kitchen and set the entire house ablaze. Artie said to him, "My God, what about the children?" Angelo said, "Fuck the children." Artie couldn't prove that Angelo was the Hillside Strangler, but given all that he knew about him, it struck him that it definitely resided within the realm of possibility. For instance, Buono's teen idol had been a man known as the, quote, red light bandit, unquote, one Carol Chessman. Chessman was not a musician, movie star, or professional athlete. He specialized in rape and robbery. He committed a series of robberies and sexual assaults in the greater Los Angeles area in the 1940s. He would lure his victims by following them to secluded areas. He posed as a police officer. He would shine a torchlight through the windows and ask them to exit the vehicle. He would proceed to rob the motorist, and if they were female, he would rape them. Back in Bellingham, detectives were searching the home of Dr. Catlow, the house where Karen Mandick and Diane Wilder were killed. The latest theory was that they were murdered on a set of stairs leading to the basement. They examined the carpet closely with a torch and a pair of tweezers. On the 6th step, they found a pubic hair. On the 9th and 10th steps, they found long blonde and dark head hairs. These hairs were later confirmed to have their origins in the scalps of Karen Mandick and Diane Wilder. The pubic hair was linked to Kenneth Bianchi. January 26, 1979. Kenneth Bianchi was charged with first-degree murder in the deaths of Karen Mandick and Diane Wilder. Prosecuting attorney David McEachran requested that Bianchi be held without bail after his arraignment. This was granted. A gag order was placed on the proceedings after it was requested by defense attorney Dean Brett. Despite this scientifically proven evidence linking him to the killings, Bianchi continued to insist that he had no involvement whatsoever. He denied that he was even so much as capable of doing such a thing. He pled innocent on all counts. His trial date was scheduled for the 8th of March. The death penalty was proposed by the state of Washington. In the meantime, Bianchi would continue to deny any memory of having committed the murders, including to Dean Brett. Bianchi had a history of mental illness and neurological afflictions. Brett decided to have Bianchi evaluated by a mental health professional to determine if he was fit to stand trial. March 10th. Kenneth Bianchi was interviewed at the Whatcom County Jail. He had little appetite and had lost weight. He wore a rosary and fiddled with it throughout. He was interviewed by Donald T. Lund, a forensic psychiatrist. Lund had a look at Bianchi's history. His adoptive mother, Frances, was emotionally and possibly physically abusive to Kenneth. Kenneth was prone to petit mal seizures and fits of trance-like daydreaming, during which his eyes would roll back in his head. He would rock back and forth or turn his head from side to side. During the trances, he was found to be out of touch with reality and unaware of what was going on around him. After some formalities, Lund got down to business. Lund: "How would you describe your mother, Ken?" Kenneth's face lit up. He smiled. Kenneth: "She was a real saint, you know? The kind of woman who would do anything for anybody. I've got all the respect in the world for my mother." Bianchi expounded at length about what a wonderful woman his mother was, saying she was kind and loving. Lund was puzzled by this. His notes indicated that Frances lost custody to social services on numerous occasions on suspicion of child abuse. Was Bianchi given to wholesale delusion? Did he truly remember nothing about the murders he committed? Dr. Lund suggested to Dean Brett that Ken should ingest some sodium amytal to unlock Bianchi's memory. This idea was scrapped since there was not enough time to administer the drug before the trial. The authorities were also unwilling to release Bianchi to a hospital. Dr. Lund recommended hypnosis as an alternative, conducted by one Dr. John G. Watkins. A delegation of Los Angeles area law enforcement requested and were granted the opportunity to witness the hypnosis session in Washington. Only 3 people were in the room during the session: Dr. Watkins, Kenneth Bianchi, and John Johnson, a psychiatric social worker. The rest of the attendees watched from behind a 2-way mirror. The session was recorded on videotape. After some perfunctory small talk, the topic of conversation drifted to Frances. Kenneth said his feelings about her changed since viewing the report about her history of child abuse. He indicated that his capacity for sweeping denial was significant enough to whitewash entire epochs of his life. He simply would not allow himself to think about unpleasant things. From the interview. Bianchi: "I mean, you could have said anything you wanted to about my mother. You could have talked until you were blue in the face, to say she was a bad mother, to discredit her. And I would have fought tooth and nail, thumbscrew. I mean, I would have argued and disagreed with anything you had to say, because I always had the greatest love and respect for my mother. But now I'm starting to wonder." Dr. Watkins: "Go on, Ken. What's on your mind?" Bianchi: "I mean, I read this report and it raises the question. I mean, I obviously had serious problems, some worse than others, some that could develop into real serious problems down the line. And now I wonder, maybe I should have had more help, more professional help." Dr. Watkins: "Ken, if you hide from yourself, if you don't know what you really are, I'm getting the sense that there's this rosy picture that you had before. It's a little bit like fooling yourself. Maybe that's been going on for a long time." Kenneth: "Yes, doctor, that's exactly what it's like." Dr. Watkins warned Kenneth about the possibility that he might not like what he would learn about himself when releasing his hidden memories, but he said that it was the only path to take in order to initiate a program of treatment that could lead to healing. Bianchi enthusiastically agreed to participate. Detective Frank Salerno was watching the session. He recalled his interview with Kelly Boyd, who said that she never witnessed memory lapses in Kenneth. Dr. Watkins carried out the methodology of placing Bianchi under hypnosis. Once Bianchi was under, Watkins carried out the following line of questioning. Watkins: I've talked a bit to Ken, but I think that maybe there's another part of Ken that I haven't talked to, that maybe feels a bit differently. And I would like that other part to come to talk to me. And when it's here, and then the left hand will lift up off the chair to indicate to me that the other part is here that I would like to talk to. Would you please come, part, so I can talk to you? Part, would you come and lift Ken's hand to indicate to me that you are here? Bianchi did not respond at first. Watkins implored the quote-unquote part to emerge and communicate with him. Still no results. Watkins took a different approach. Watkins: Part, you don't have to speak with Ken if you don't want to. You can just speak to me. Anything you tell me will be between you and me. I won't share anything with Ken. Part, if you would like to talk to me, I would like to ask you to communicate with me by raising Ken's left hand. Kenneth's left hand rose slowly from the chair rest. Bianchi: Yes. This voice was deeper than Kenneth's customary speaking voice. Watkins: Hello? Bianchi: Yes, I am here. Watkins: Part, are you the same as Ken or different in some way? Bianchi: I'm not Ken. Do I look like Ken? Part was not at all flattered by the comparison. He even sounded disgusted by the implication. Part did not like Kenneth. Dr. Watkins: Now just make yourself comfortable in the chair there. Do you have a name? What shall I call you? Bianchi: It's Steve. You can call me Steve. Watkins: Nice to meet you, Steve. Now we don't have to talk about Ken. It's you I want to know about. Tell me about yourself. What do you do? At the mere mention of Ken, Steve's mood soured. Bianchi: I hate him, that fucking pansy. Watkins: Why do you hate Ken? Bianchi: He's such an ass. He puts up with all her shit. Watkins: Who? Whose shit does he put up with? Bianchi: My mother. I hate my mother. I hate a lot of people. Watkins: So Ken's mother is your mother? Bianchi: Not exactly. Well, she is in a way. Watkins: Why do you hate your mother, Steve? Bianchi: She wouldn't let go. Steve said he hated Francis, but not nearly as much as he hated Ken. He said Ken was an ass. He hated him because he was soft. He called him dumb. He resented Ken because he wouldn't stand up to Francis. He mentioned that Ken was easy to deceive, which he also detested. Steve enjoyed playing games with Ken's mind. Bianchi: I make him do things he would never do because he doesn't have the guts. Then make him forget about it later. He gets so confused. Watkins: What do you make Ken do? Bianchi: I make him lie. I make him hurt people. Steve smiled, satisfied by what he had wrought. Bianchi: Oh, I fixed him good. When he went to Los Angeles. Oh, I am so good. I was with him on night. He walked in on his cousin Angelo, and Angelo had a girl over. Ken walked in the middle of Angelo killing this girl. Watkins: Who's Angelo? Bianchi: This turkey he knows in Los Angeles, his cousin. I made him go over to Angelo's and think all these morbid thoughts. Watkins: Like what? Bianchi: Like there's nothing wrong with killing, and then I make him forget about it later, see? Salerno wasn't buying any of this. He was convinced Bianchi was performing. Watkins, you made him kill? Who did you make him kill? Bianchi, the girls. I made him think it was his mother and people he hated. Then I made him forget about it. I stitched that turkey up so good. Watkins, how did Ken kill the girls? Bianchi, he killed some of them and he helped with others. Watkins, you mean him and Angelo together? Bianchi, yeah. Watkins, I see. Well, how would he kill him? Would he shoot him or what? Bianchi, oh, I made him strangle them all. Dr. Watkins prodded Steve for more details. He particularly wanted to know about the Bellingham murders. He asked him what happened with Karen Mandick. He wanted to know how Kenneth and Karen became acquainted. Steve explained that they had been friends. Steve hated anyone that Kenneth liked, and he decided to get even. He forced Kenneth to kill her and Diane. He told Kenneth that they were the kind of people who made his father leave. Kenneth lost his father to a heart attack when he was in his early teens. It was a traumatic event for him, as he had been very close to his father. Steve said he strangled the girls, put them in the car, and drove them to a street. Bianchi snapped out of it later and found himself walking down the road, with no memory of how he got there. Steve also talked about what happened to Yolanda Washington. Bianchi, we picked her up downtown, down in Hollywood. She was a hussy. We drove around, and I fucked her, and she was getting more and more terrified. Angelo said, get rid of her. So I did. When asked to give Angelo's full name, he gave it as Angelo Buono. He mentioned the upholstery business and its address. At this point, it was looking more and more like Bianchi and Buono were indeed the Hillside Stranglers. Watkins, you fixed Ken good. Bianchi, laughing. He's such a sap. I wish I could stay out. I want to be out. Watkins, what would you do if you got out? Bianchi, I'd kill Ken. I got to get rid of him, make him disappear. Watkins, who else would you kill? Bianchi, I don't know. I'd find somebody. Watkins asked Steve if he ever killed men. Bianchi, Ken hates women. I mean, I hate women. Watkins, why? Bianchi, they hurt. The detectives were still skeptical. They were convinced that the whole thing was a charade, especially when Bianchi slipped up, like when he said, Ken hates women. I mean, I hate women. They also believed that the tough guy Steve persona was modeled after Angelo Buono. At the conclusion of the session, Bianchi claimed to have no memory of the Steve persona's presence, and that the entire experience was one of missing time. Dr. Watkins was convinced that Bianchi had multiple personality disorder. Court psychologists concluded that Kenneth Bianchi was faking during the hypnosis session. This completely upended his attempt to avoid prosecution with an insanity plea. Bianchi agreed to plead guilty and testify against Angelo Buono in exchange for a lenient sentence. He received a life sentence, which he is still serving at the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla. Angelo Buono also received a life sentence. He died of a heart attack on September 21st, 2002 at Calipatria State Prison in California. Thank you for listening to Human Monsters. Bye for now.